For today's project, I'm going to be restoring this old hacksaw. I tried to consolidate a lot of the video footage, so that way it's a little bit shorter video. I know it's not the most exciting to watch me grind off rust or sand some things, so here we go. First, just started disassembling, and there's really not much to it. I did not knock out any of the rivets on this. I just purely kept the big pieces together and took off the small ones. So the first step was just taking each of the pieces and taking them over to the wire wheel, getting off all the rust and making them pretty much silver. There's really only, I think, 4 total pieces that I had to polish up. This wing nut, the piece you just saw, and then the collar for the handle, which I was really delicate, relatively speaking, here, because this is a brass piece and the brass metal is a lot softer. Then after that, focused on the handle and used the card scraper first. It's a lot easier and saves you a lot of sandpaper if you take off the piece this way. So it's going to get off all the old varnish and any kind of lacquer, grime, that kind of stuff right off the bat. And then once you get finished with that, you can switch over and use sandpaper, which you'll see here in a second. But on the sandpaper, went from 60 grit to get rid of the big chunks of residue that were left over and any big pieces. After that, went to 120 and 220 grit sandpaper. So didn't want to sand anything to reduce the diameter here for the collar, and then also didn't fill any of the voids. I like the character that's left over from these old pieces when you just smooth them out and clean them up. But once the sanding was done, just took some mineral spirits to get off any of the oils and residue, and you kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like. Then I took the collar, which was pretty beat up, and just put it on top of an old dowel that I had and hammered it flat, so that way it would sit a little more flush and just look a lot better. Once it was hammered out, just got a little miniature wire attachment that I can put on the drill and cleaned out the inside of the collar and got all the dust and residue out of it, and it shined up pretty quickly. From there, had some 500 grit sandpaper to do a really light sanding. There are kind of nicks and dings in this, so some of the residue was sitting in those pits. But nothing wild, just getting it a little bit cleaner than it was and not going overboard on it. Then after the fact, took some acetone to clean off the pieces that I'd earlier hit up with the wire wheel, and that way it gets all the excess oil from my hands and any leftover dirt out of it. I didn't go and sand any of these pieces, just purely cleaned them up and then used the buffing wheel to get a little bit more of a shine to it. Again, if you spend a lot more time and a whole lot of different sandpaper grits, you can make these metal pieces really shiny and glossy where you can see your reflection. But for me, it's more, not quite a complete restore, it's just a matter of getting it much better than it was. So after I polished it up, just wipe off any of the kind of grime that sticks over and the black residue that's left. Here I ended up squeezing way too much of the brass cleaner. So that was unintentional. You don't need anywhere near that much, but just I was able to get most of it out. It took me a little time to get the inside since I put so much on there. Then once the mineral spirits had completely dried and evaporated off of this handle, went back, put a stain on it, wiped that off, and then off camera I sprayed 3 coats of spray polyurethane on there. But in between each of the coats I would let them sit on the bolt that I had so it could dry. And I did not buy a new blade for this. I just got the rust off the old blade and used it to put it back together. So here I'm kind of test fitting, see how close the handle is going to look. And then once it was ready, took it back off. Just use a little bit of super glue to get the collar put on here, wipe off all the excess so it doesn't bleed over into the other pieces. And I'm out of epoxy at the house, so I just used a whole lot of super glue on the inside of the handle too. It's not recommended to use super glue. I would recommend using epoxy, or better yet, filling this void with another dowel or something and then kind of drilling out a new hole. It's probably a better way to go, but it's not a professional project by any means, so I'm simply doing what I had on hand. So making sure I wiped off any and all of the squeeze out here, and once I got that, just lightly tapped it in place and then loosely put it together with some clamps. So that just keeps it from bowing and keeps the handle as straight as possible. So here's some before and after pictures, and then a quick little flyby video at the end of these pictures so you can see what it looks like from start to finish. And there is the logo. So it's a Red Devil number 1042. I'm not sure if anybody else is familiar with those guys, but I've never heard of that brand. But it was a good little project. Didn't take long at all to do this kind of thing. It's just a whole lot of changes in a short amount of time, which is great. So, thanks for watching.